There is something sitting in a health food store right now. It costs less than your morning coffee. And inside a small amber bottle, it holds a molecular secret that a $30 billion industry has spent 6 decades quietly burying. Not suppressing with force, not destroying with fire, just silence, strategic, organized, profitable silence. And in that silence, millions of people, men and women, spent thousands of dollars on prescriptions, procedures, and promises, while this one thing sat on a shelf, unpatented, unbranded, $2 a bottle. Welcome to Quicksecret. This is the channel where the locked doors get opened, where the knowledge that was meant to stay hidden finds its way to you. And today, what we're opening is one of the oldest locked doors in medicine. Stay with me, because by the time this is over, you're never going to look at hair loss the same way again. Let's start with something most people never stop to question. Hair loss is treated like a disease, a condition, a medical problem requiring a medical solution, requiring a prescription, requiring a professional, requiring a monthly payment, forever. And the industry built around it is not small. Over $30 billion every single year. Minoxidil, finasteride, laser caps, transplant surgery, monthly subscriptions, dermatology consultations. Every one of these things costs money, real money, recurring money, and every one of them is positioned as the only option, the real option, the scientifically validated option. But here is what no dermatologist has ever put on a prescription pad. A plant oil, cold pressed from the seeds of a shrub, used continuously for 3,000 years across at least 4 independent civilizations. Confirmed effective in a peer-reviewed, randomized, controlled trial published in 2021. Priced at approximately $2 for a supply that lasts weeks. The oil is castor oil. And the reason you haven't heard about it in a clinical context, the reason your dermatologist has never mentioned it, is not because the science doesn't exist. It's because the science can't be monetized. Now, before we go deeper, I want you to understand something. This is not a story about a miracle. Miracles require faith. What we're talking about today requires only a working knowledge of molecular biology and the willingness to ask one simple question. Who benefits from you not knowing this? Keep that question in your mind. We're going to come back to it. Because first, I want to take you somewhere. I want to take you back 3,500 years. Egypt, 1550 BC. The Nile Delta is the most productive agricultural region on Earth. The civilization that built the Great Pyramid, already 800 years old at this point, has developed a medical tradition so sophisticated that it will not be surpassed in documented form for over 1,000 years. And the physicians of this civilization are writing. The document they're creating is called the Ebers Papyrus, named after the German Egyptologist who purchased it in 1873. It is the most complete surviving medical text of the ancient world. 877 documented medical prescriptions, surgical procedures, pharmaceutical preparations, diagnostic methods. Modern medical historians who study it use a specific word, remarkable, not because of mysticism, because of accuracy, because of observation, because the ancient Egyptians were watching carefully, recording carefully, and, in many cases, arriving at conclusions that molecular biology would not catch up to for 30 more centuries. One of those conclusions appears multiple times in the Ebers Papyrus. For the treatment of hair loss, what the Egyptians called alopecia, the prescribed topical treatment was oil extracted from the seeds of the castor plant, applied to the scalp, regularly. These were not folk remedies, these were clinical prescriptions, written by physicians, in the most advanced medical tradition of their time. Now, what did they know that they weren't supposed to know? The Egyptian observation did not stay in Egypt. The Greek physicians, who came after, who built their tradition partly on what they learned from Egyptian medicine, documented the same thing. A first-century Greek physician named Dioscorides. His medical encyclopedia, De Materia Medica, became the foundational pharmaceutical reference text for 15 centuries, used by Roman physicians, by Islamic scholars, by European doctors well into the Renaissance, and in De Materia Medica, Dioscorides writes about castor oil. He notes something specific, something that stood out to him enough to record it. He observed that castor oil did not simply sit on the surface of the skin, it penetrated into the skin, and its effects on hair follicles were distinct from ordinary moisturizing. He made that observation without a microscope, without cellular biology, without the concept of a hair follicle or a dermal papilla cell or a prostaglandin receptor. He made it through pure, careful, patient observation. And 2,000 years later, modern dermatology confirmed that he was exactly right. The oil penetrates deeply. Its mechanism is not surface moisturizing. It acts inside the follicle, at the cellular level. Dioscorides noticed that with his eyes. Science confirmed it with electron microscopes and receptor binding assays. Think about what that means for a moment. On the other side of the world, completely independently, the Ayurvedic physicians of ancient India were arriving at the same place, the Karaka Samhita, one of the foundational texts of Ayurvedic medicine, compiled around 400 AD, but documenting oral traditions that are considerably older. In that text, castor oil is classified as a Kesha herb. Kesha, a compound that promotes hair growth and prevents hair loss. And here's the detail that stops me every time I think about it. The Ayurvedic application method, warm oil massaged into the scalp, left overnight, is described in specific procedural detail. Warm it, massage it in, leave it. Modern dermatology's research into maximizing follicular penetration of topical treatments arrived at the exact same protocol. Warm oil is less viscous. It penetrates more readily into follicular openings. Massage drives it in mechanically. Overnight contact maximizes absorption. The ancient Indian physicians didn't know any of that science. They just knew what worked. And what worked in ancient India is what works today, confirmed in 2021 in a randomized controlled trial in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. Now I need to tell you the science, because this is where it gets serious. When you understand exactly how castor oil works, the molecular mechanism, the question of why the hair loss industry has never acknowledged it becomes almost impossible to answer charitably. Hair growth is not random. It is tightly controlled by a biological cycle. The anagen phase, active growth. The hair fiber is being produced. In scalp hair, this lasts 2 to 7 years. The catagen phase, a brief transitional period, 2 to 3 weeks. The telogen phase, rest. The follicle goes dormant. The old fiber is shed. This lasts 2 to 4 months. Hair thinning and hair loss happen when follicles progressively spend less time in anagen, the growth phase, and more time in telogen, the dormant phase, when follicles shrink with each cycle, producing thinner, shorter fibers, until eventually, visible hair stops being produced. This is hair loss. This is what millions of people are spending $30 billion per year trying to reverse. And the molecular system, most directly involved in controlling whether a follicle enters anagen or stays in telogen, is called the prostaglandin signaling system. Prostaglandins are lipid compounds, local hormones, produced in tissue, acting on nearby cells through receptor binding. Prostaglandin E2, PGE2, promotes anagen. When PGE2 binds to receptors on follicle dermal papilla cells and stem cells, it triggers signaling cascades that push the follicle from dormancy into active growth. A 1997 paper in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology, Johns Hopkins researchers, showed that PGE2 applied to skin significantly accelerated anagen induction in mouse models. Subsequent research confirmed this in human follicle models. PGE2 is a molecular switch. When it's activated, hair grows. Now, castor oil is approximately 90% composed of a single fatty acid, ricinoleic acid. And ricinoleic acid, the dominant compound in the oil that costs $2, is a documented prostaglandin E2 receptor agonist. It activates EP3 receptors, one of the 4 PGE2 receptor subtypes. Through a mechanism documented in a 2002 paper in the British Journal of Pharmacology, the paper established that ricinoleic acid mimics prostaglandin E2 at EP3 receptors, with sufficient potency to produce pharmacologically relevant effects in EP3 expressing tissues. Hair follicle, dermal papilla cells, express EP3 receptors. Do you see what I'm saying? The compound that makes up 90% of a $2 plant oil directly activates the molecular switch that tells dormant hair follicles to start growing again. This has been in the scientific literature since 2002. It was confirmed in a clinical context in a 2021 randomized controlled trial published in the Journal of Cosmetic Dermatology. 44 participants, mild to moderate androgenetic alopecia, the most common form of hair loss in both men and women. 12 weeks. Castor oil versus mineral oil control. Statistically significant increase in hair density in the castor oil group. Statistically significant improvement in hair shaft diameter, meaning follicle miniaturization, was being reversed. The researchers specifically identified ricinoleic acid's prostaglandin E2 agonist activity as the mechanism driving these results. Now I want you to hold that in your mind, and I want you to look at minoxidil. Minoxidil, sold as Rogaine, costs $20 to $40 per month. It must be applied daily, forever. Stop applying it. Hair loss resumes within months. Minoxidil works primarily through vasodilation. It increases blood flow to the scalp. It was originally developed as an antihypertensive drug. Unwanted hair growth was a side effect. The pharmaceutical company noticed the side effect and pivoted. Minoxidil's effect on the prostaglandin pathway is indirect, secondary. Ricinoleic acid's effect on the prostaglandin pathway is direct. It is a prostaglandin receptor agonist. It directly activates the molecular switch. A compound that directly activates the system versus a compound that indirectly affects it through vasodilation would be expected, on straightforward scientific logic, to be at least as effective. And the 2021 clinical trial suggests exactly that. There's been no pharmaceutical company-funded head-to-head trial comparing castor oil to minoxidil, and now we arrive at the question I told you to keep in mind. Who benefits from you not knowing this? This is Quicksecret, and this, right here, is exactly the kind of question we exist to ask. Because the answer is not hidden, it's just never said out loud in the places where you'd expect to hear it. The global hair loss treatment market generates over $30 billion annually. Minoxidil, finasteride, laser therapy, transplant surgery. Every one of those revenue streams depends on one thing: the belief that hair loss is a medical condition requiring medical, and specifically pharmaceutical or procedural, intervention, not a biological process that a traditional botanical compound has been addressing effectively for 3,000 years. Minoxidil's development in the 1980s illustrates how the industry processes competing knowledge. The Upjohn Company, the pharmaceutical company that developed topical minoxidil, conducted research into the mechanisms of hair growth that explicitly engage with prostaglandin pathways. Their internal research literature from the 1970s references castor oil's prostaglandin-like activity as part of the broader investigation into vasoactive and prostanoid compounds for hair loss. They knew. The decision to develop a synthetic patentable compound, rather than investigate the natural plant oil, was not a scientific decision. It was a business decision. A natural plant oil cannot be patented. It cannot be owned. It cannot generate $30 billion in recurring annual revenue. A synthetic compound, requiring a prescription, sold under a brand name, taken forever, can. That is the entire explanation. That is the silence, not conspiracy. Economics. The ordinary, predictable economics of an industry that profits from ongoing treatment rather than resolution. Now, one more layer. The natural hair care community, primarily black women in the United States and the Caribbean, never stopped using castor oil, Jamaican black castor oil, a traditional preparation where the castor beans are roasted before pressing, producing a darker oil with a distinctive scent. This tradition has been continuous for at least 3 centuries, documented in traveler accounts, colonial agricultural records, and then, starting in the 1970s and accelerating through the 2000s, documented on a scale the pharmaceutical industry could not easily ignore. YouTube channels, before and after photographs, Instagram accounts reaching millions of viewers, generational knowledge shared publicly, documented in real time, across communities that had never needed a dermatologist to tell them what their grandmothers already knew. The natural hair movement generated what amounts to an enormous real-world observational data set. Castor oil for hair growth, applied consistently, documented over months, and the results were not subtle. The dermatology research community eventually began taking notice, not because the industry funded investigation, but because the documented evidence in the public record became impossible to dismiss. The 2021 clinical trial that confirmed the mechanism was not funded by a pharmaceutical company. A 2023 review in the International Journal of Dermatology analyzed accumulated evidence for plant-based prostaglandin modulators in hair loss treatment. It specifically identified castor oil as having the strongest evidence base among botanical hair growth promoters. And it called for larger randomized controlled trials. No pharmaceutical company has funded those trials, because the plant can't be patented. Now I'm going to give you the exact protocol. The method that produces maximum follicular penetration and maximum prostaglandin receptor activation. Because knowing the science is one thing, using it correctly is what actually changes results. First, the oil itself. Not all castor oil produces the same results. Ricinoleic acid content is highest in cold, pressed hexane-free castor oil. Refined castor oil, clear, odorless, processed with solvents and heat, has reduced ricinoleic acid concentration. You want the unrefined version, pale yellow to amber, slightly viscous, a faint characteristic smell. Jamaican black castor oil, made from roasted beans, is also effective and has a darker color and stronger scent from the roasting ash. A 16-ounce bottle of cold-pressed castor oil costs $6 to $10 from health food stores or online retailers. That is your starting point. Second, the application method. Castor oil is thick, significantly more viscous than most plant oils. This is important. If you simply pour it onto your scalp and leave it, you get surface deposition. The oil sits on top. It does not reach the dermal papilla cells that express the prostaglandin receptors. You need to get it into the follicle. The way you do that is warmth and massage. Warm the oil slightly before application. Place the bottle in warm water for 5 minutes. Warm oil is less viscous. It flows and penetrates more readily. Apply approximately half a teaspoon directly to the scalp, not to the hair length. This is scalp treatment. Focus it at the source. Then massage. Firm circular motions. Fingertips. Minimum 4 minutes. Full coverage. Pay particular attention to thinning areas. The massage should move the scalp skin itself, not just slide over the hair. You are mechanically driving the oil into the follicular openings. This is not optional. The massage is part of the mechanism. Third, contact time. Leave the oil on your scalp for a minimum of 4 hours. Overnight application is optimal. Apply before sleep. Wash out in the morning with 2 rounds of shampoo. Castor oil washes out cleanly. Put a towel over your pillow if you're concerned about transfer. The overnight contact time is what maximizes ricinoleic acid absorption into the follicular unit. Fourth, the enhanced protocol. The most evidence-supported botanical hair growth combination pairs castor oil with rosemary oil. Rosemary oil's mechanism is different and complementary. It inhibits 5-alpha reductase, the enzyme that converts testosterone into DHT, the primary hormonal driver of androgenetic alopecia. A 2015 randomized controlled trial published in SkinMed compared rosemary oil directly to 2% minoxidil for androgenetic alopecia over 6 months. Statistically equivalent hair count improvement at 6 months. No dermatology professional society has incorporated rosemary oil into its treatment guidelines. The trial was not funded by a pharmaceutical company. That created an easy dismissal pathway. The results were not rebutted. They were simply ignored. Combined protocol. 10 drops of rosemary essential oil mixed into each tablespoon of castor oil before application. Castor oil addresses the prostaglandin pathway directly. Rosemary oil addresses the hormonal pathway. 2 compounds, 2 mechanisms, both supported by randomized controlled trial evidence, both available at your local health food store. Fifth, frequency and timeline. 2 to 3 times per week for the first month. Once to twice per week as maintenance after visible improvement. The 2021 clinical trial showed statistically significant improvement at 12 weeks. Most people documenting their results in online communities report visible change at 8 to 12 weeks of consistent use. Hair grows approximately ½ inch per month during the anagen phase. This is a slow process. Patience is not optional. Consistency is not optional. These are the primary determinants of outcome. Now I want to be honest with you, because honesty is the only thing that separates real information from the same manipulation we're trying to expose. This will not work for everyone. If hair follicles have been completely miniaturized, if there are no remaining viable follicular stem cells to activate, no botanical compound will restore them. Neither will minoxidil. Severe alopecia areata, an autoimmune condition, involves a completely different mechanism. The prostaglandin pathway is not the primary driver. What the evidence supports is the stimulation of viable but dormant follicles. Follicles that still have the biological capacity to produce hair, but are spending too much time in telogen. This is the most common form of hair thinning in both men and women. If you are in the early to moderate stages of hair thinning, if your scalp is still producing hair but it's becoming thinner, finer, more sparse, the mechanism is in place. The biology is addressable. That's where this works. That's where 3,000 years of empirical observation and at least one rigorous modern clinical trial say this should be applied. I want to tell you about one person, a composite of many real documented experiences, because the individual stories across online communities number in the thousands. Think of a woman in her mid-30s, natural hair community. She'd noticed thinning along her part line for about 2 years. Not alarming, but visible to her. She could see her scalp through her hair in a way she never had before. Women she'd never met asking for the exact method, sharing their own results, sharing their grandmother's method, sharing their mother's method. None of them had learned this from a doctor. All of them were using the same mechanism that a 2021 clinical trial confirmed, the same mechanism that ancient Egyptian physicians documented, the same mechanism that the hair loss industry has spent 60 years not mentioning. This is what happens when knowledge survives despite the people who benefit from its suppression. Here is what I need you to sit with. In 1550 BC, a physician in the Nile Delta examined a patient losing their hair, prescribed castor oil, applied to the scalp. In 2021 AD, researchers in a clinical trial confirmed that the molecular mechanism underlying that prescription, ricinoleic acid activating PGE2 receptors on follicle stem cells, is real and measurable. The physician in Egypt did not understand molecular biology. The understanding took 3,000 years to arrive, but the observation, the careful, patient, empirical observation that castor oil promotes hair growth, was accurate the entire time. What changed in those 3,000 years is the technology we use to explain why. What didn't change is the biology. Ricinoleic acid activates prostaglandin E2 receptors today the same way it did in ancient Egypt. The hair follicle's anagen induction pathway responds to PGE2 agonism today the same way it did in ancient India. And the answer, the honest, clear, straightforward answer, is the people who built a $30 billion business on the premise that you don't. You are watching Quicksecret because somewhere you suspected that there was more to the story, that the $30 billion answer wasn't the only answer, that the prescription pad wasn't the only pathway, that the knowledge locked in ancient texts and grandmother's medicine cabinets and community practice that outlasted every industry trend, that knowledge was trying to reach you. It reached you today. A bottle of cold-pressed castor oil, $6 to $10, a 5-minute warm water soak, a 4-minute scalp massage, an overnight soak in the follicular channels that the Ebers Papyrus pointed at 3,500 years before a single journal article confirmed the mechanism. This is yours now. The Egyptians gave it to the Greeks. The Greeks passed it forward. India developed it independently. Jamaica preserved it continuously. Online communities documented it publicly. A clinical trial confirmed it scientifically. Subscribe to Quicksecret. Hit the bell. Every notification is another locked door. Share this video with someone who is spending $40 a month on a prescription that works on the same pathway as a plant oil they've never been told about. Comment below. Tell me what your grandmother or mother told you. The remedies, the traditions, the knowledge passed down that no pharmaceutical company funded and no dermatologist ever recommended. Because those comment threads, those collections of generational knowledge, are exactly the kind of archive that matters. Next video, there is a common kitchen ingredient that lowers cortisol as effectively as a class of prescription anxiolytics. Used for 2,000 years in traditional medicine, confirmed in a 2019 double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. Never appeared in a mainstream anxiety treatment guideline. You already know why. We'll talk about it soon. Stay on Quicksecret. The vaults don't open themselves.